In this lecture, we will get our first taste of JavaScript by running instructions in the browser. Typically, JavaScript is written in a separate file. However, the browser provides a few tools for quickly executing JavaScript in the browser. These tools allow us to quickly debug our applications. Let's give them a try. Open the developer tools for your browser. You can open the developer tools on any site. It doesn't have to be our WordPress site. Switch to the panel called Console. The Console panel is a tool for reading messages from our site. These messages can range from errors to notices. It's an incredibly helpful tool for debugging an application. Messages can come from the browser or the code in our files. Immediately, you may be receiving messages from the browser. I have the console opened for our site. The console may be littered with error messages. As you can see, the console is already being helpful. It will inform you of problems on your site. For this demonstration, we are going to ignore these messages. At the top left corner of the console, there is a button for clearing the console. Click on it. After doing so, the error messages should go away. Time to start writing JavaScript. For starters, let's try running a function. Functions in JavaScript are similar to functions in PHP. It is a feature for writing logic in a block of code. This block of code is entirely reusable. JavaScript functions support parameters and return values. Surprisingly, the syntax is going to be very similar to PHP. You'll feel right at home. Generally, there are three types of functions. There are functions defined by the language. We saw an example of this in PHP. PHP has functions that are automatically available to us from the beginning. The same can be said about JavaScript. JavaScript has a variety of functions built into the language. An example would be the parseInt function. The second type of function is custom-defined functions. JavaScript allows developers to define custom functions. Lastly, there are environment-specific functions. These types of functions are not common in PHP. PHP is aimed at web development. It doesn't matter if you're running a server on Windows, Mac, or Linux. The same functions will be available. The same can't be said for JavaScript. As we discussed before, JavaScript is a general-purpose language. We can run JavaScript on the browser or a mobile device. These locations are referred to as environments. Each environment will define additional functions to the language, which are available immediately. For this course, we are going to focus on functions that are available in the browser. The alert function is an example of a function defined by the environment. In the console of the developer tools, we're allowed to run functions. Let's try using the alert function. A function is written by typing the name followed by a pair of parentheses. Lastly, we can add a semicolon to end the statement. To be clear, we're not defining a function. We're calling an existing function that has been defined by the environment, which is the browser. The alert function will open a pop-up with a message. The message can be modified through the function's argument list. You can probably guess where we would write the message. If you guessed within the parentheses, you would be correct. Inside the parentheses, let's write a message by surrounding it with double quotes. Once again, there are striking similarities with PHP. The quotes denote a string. JavaScript supports strings, which are a string of characters. We are allowed to write whatever we want inside the quotes. Let's execute the function by pressing Enter. Almost immediately, a pop-up will appear in the browser. Our message will be visible from within the pop-up. By using JavaScript, we can add an interactive experience to the browser. The alert function is a small portion of what JavaScript has to offer. In some cases, you may want to run multiple lines of JavaScript. The console allows multiple lines, but it may not be the best way to write a long script. Inside the console, let's write the same alert function. Afterward, let's add another alert function on a new line. We must hold down the Shift key to add a new line. On the new line, let's add the second alert function. What do you think will happen when we run this line of code? Let's find out. After running the code, the pop-up appears with the first message. However, a second pop-up is not showing. This is because JavaScript is blocking the next line of code. The next line of code can't run until the previous line has finished executing. While the first pop-up is alive, JavaScript considers the first line to be running. If we press OK, the previous instruction will be finished. The next line will run. A second pop-up will appear on the page. This behavior is essential to understand. Instructions will run line by line. The next instruction can't run until the previous instruction has been completed. Running code in the console is a great way to test features. However, you may want to run multiple lines of code. The console is great for running 1 or 2 lines of code. If you need to write more than 2 lines of code, you should consider an alternative option. There's another panel worth checking out. It's called Sources. The Sources panel will display a list of files that have been loaded on your site. This panel sounds very similar to the Network panel. There are some distinctions between the two panels. Both panels will provide a list of files for your site. However, the Network panel is mainly for inspecting the network activity of a site. You will be able to view incoming and outgoing requests, whereas the Sources panel is a tool for debugging files. We can modify or create files. It's a great tool for quickly debugging a site without modifying the original code. Keep in mind, changes to your files from the Sources panel will not be reflected in your project. At the top left corner, click on the double chevron icon. An option will appear called Snippets. Snippets are JavaScript files that are saved within the browser. They are not saved with your project's codebase. Snippets are a great tool for writing JavaScript with multiple lines of code. Let's add a snippet called index.js. The name of the file can be whatever you want. As long as it ends with the JS extension, you're good to go. JavaScript files must have the JS extension to be considered valid. Inside our snippet, let's write the alert function with single quotes. Strings can be written with double quotes or single quotes. There isn't a difference between the two. Some developers prefer to write strings with single quotes because it's easier to read. Feel free to use whichever style suits you. Next, let's remove the semicolon from the line. Semicolons are optional in JavaScript. This is the first difference between PHP and JavaScript. In PHP, instructions must end with a semicolon. Otherwise, you will receive a syntax error. On the other hand, instructions in JavaScript don't require a semicolon. JavaScript is a very smart language. It can close instructions for you. For the rest of this course, I'm going to ignore semicolons. It's very rare to need them. Let's run our code. At the bottom right corner, we can run a snippet by pressing the play button. Upon clicking this button, a pop-up should appear with our message. In addition, the developer tools will open a console below the Sources panel. This window can be helpful if you're logging data in the console. I'm going to close the console. On the right side of the panel, there are additional tools for debugging your files. We can safely ignore these tools. We won't be needing them. So, that's your first taste of JavaScript. Pretty cool, right? So many of the concepts you've learned with PHP can be transferred to JavaScript. Along the way, we've encountered differences, such as the semicolon being optional for lines of code. As we go through the language, you'll pick up more nuances. Let's continue our exploration of JavaScript in the next few lectures.